Hey folks, welcome back to Liberal Breakdown. Today, Wall Street is in free fall, and yes, you guessed it, Trump's tantrums are back. U.S. stocks tanked today. The Dow plunged over 800 points. The S&P and Nasdaq followed suit. Why? Because former President Donald Trump went on another rant, this time attacking Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell again. He called him a, quote, major loser, and accused him of deliberately hurting the economy.
Markets opened rattled this morning because Beijing was essentially putting pressure on their trading partners not to work with the U.S. On essentially not trading with China any longer. And then after that, there was a Truth Social post by President Trump that came out, which sort of rattled markets again. And that's why you're seeing that steep decline. The Dow down 1,100 points now. But you can see the post right there where he's essentially calling on the Federal Reserve to cut rates. This is something that the president really has no power doing. And when he talks about Mr. Too Late, he's talking about the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Over the last week or so, he's really ratcheted up his pressure on the Fed chair, essentially calling for his termination, saying if I could terminate him at some point, I will. The president appointed Jerome Powell in his first term. President Biden re-upped him for his second term. And ultimately, President Trump there, though, saying that he has the power to remove the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. But that is not necessarily the case here. And there's some legal precedent for that says that the president does not have the authority to remove the chair of the Federal Reserve unless there are three sort of different qualifications: inefficiency, neglect of duty, malfeasance of office.
Look, you don't need a degree in economics to know this is dangerous. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent. That's how we avoid politicizing interest rates and keep inflation under control. But Trump wants to control it all: the courts, the Fed, even the stock market. So what does this mean for everyday Americans? Well, your 401k just took a hit. Housing loans could get more expensive, and the international markets, they're watching this chaos and running for the hills. The dollar dropped to a decade low against the Swiss franc. Gold hit a record $3,500 per ounce. These are signals of fear, of instability. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers even said this could become America's Liz Truss moment, a reference to the UK Prime Minister's economic meltdown that tanked their currency and cost her the job. That's the level of recklessness we're talking about here. We're not just talking about mean tweets anymore. This is real economic sabotage. Markets don't trust Trump. Investors don't trust Trump. And honestly, neither should we. Look, America's economy should not be a playground for one man's ego. We need real policy, not a guy with a vendetta against the Federal Reserve.
President Donald Trump, as is the norm, won't be attending the International Monetary Fund and World Bank spring meetings, but his presence will loom large over the proceedings. At the start of this year, the US economy, well, it was looking pretty good. Plenty of economists were feeling upbeat. Many of them were forecasting growth of around 2.5%. But that optimism, it's starting to cool off. The International Monetary Fund is expected to dial down its global growth forecast, in large part because of Trump's trade war, which is being felt well beyond US borders. Inflation in the United States, which had been making progress, has started to stall out, and those tariffs, well, they're not helping. The men and women who run the global economy and who are gathering this week for meetings in Washington are likely to try to ramp up negotiations with the Trump administration in an attempt to try to evade duties. Adding to all of the drama, the United States is considering whether or not to withdraw from both institutions. If that were to happen, it could shake things up in a big way.
The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are holding their annual spring meetings in D.C. And Trump, nowhere to be found, not attending, but somehow he's dominating the conversation. Why? Because his administration is throwing the global economy into chaos. Tariffs, attacks on the Fed, a tanking dollar, all of it is front and center at these meetings. Trump's ghost is haunting the entire event. This is what Trumpism looks like on the global stage. He doesn't go to the meetings, he doesn't talk to experts, but his policies are so disruptive that world leaders have no choice but to talk about him. Instead of engaging with the IMF or World Bank, Trump's reviewing whether the U.S. should even stay involved in these institutions at all. You know, the ones that helped rebuild the world after World War II? While Trump's out playing strongman, our actual role in shaping global policy is shrinking. There's still no permanent U.S. executive director at either the IMF or the World Bank. We've got a skeleton crew representing us at a time when the U.S. should be leading. But sure, let's just ghost the world economy and hope everything works out. This is the cost of populist politics. We lose influence, we lose credibility, and the American people pay the price.
The scale and scope of the ongoing attacks on liberty are literally unprecedented. With that in mind, I want to note that before I use what is not a precedent, I understand very well why it is wrong to compare Adolf Hitler's Third Reich to any other movement. It was uniquely evil, full stop. I get it. But there are important lessons from the history of that emergent evil, and here is one that I regard as essential. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, a small group of philosophers who had escaped Hitler's murderous regime returned to Germany and performed a kind of moral autopsy on the Third Reich. His mentor, Theodor Adorno, who wrote that the first step in that nation's descent into hell was, and I quote, the conversion of all questions of truth into questions of power. He described how the Nazis, and I quote again, attacked the very heart of the distinction between true and false.
Former Vice President Al Gore just publicly compared Donald Trump's administration to Nazi Germany, specifically how they both manipulate truth to gain and maintain power. Now, before anyone freaks out, he's not saying Trump is Hitler. He's talking about how regimes start, how they bend the truth, flood the public with disinformation, and turn reality into something optional. And if you think that sounds familiar, yeah. Gore was speaking at Climate Week in San Francisco, and he didn't hold back. He slammed the Trump administration for attacking climate science, gutting environmental protections, and basically gaslighting the public about what's happening to the planet. He said, and I quote, "They are attempting to create a preferred version of reality. That's how democratic systems crumble. That's how fascism starts." And honestly, he's right. When you've got an administration that calls real news fake, censors government scientists, and lies so casually it makes Orwell blush. Yeah, comparisons to the early stages of authoritarianism aren't that far off. Is it uncomfortable to hear? Yeah, but sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, and ignoring it is what lets this kind of manipulation grow. So no, this isn't just another political jab, it's a warning. From someone who's seen how fragile our systems can be, the question is, are we listening?
Harvard University is now suing the Trump administration over the administration's threats to cut billions of dollars from the university's funding. It's the latest escalation in the showdown between Harvard and the Trump administration after Harvard's leaders rebuked Trump's demands to change key policies and courses even. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is at the White House. Jeff, what is Harvard University's president saying about the lawsuit?
Well, Jake, this lawsuit is coming in. It's being filed against a variety of different agencies and cabinet secretaries, from RFK Jr. at the Department of Health and Human Services to Pam Bondi to the Defense Department. Basically all the agencies that have some funding for research programs at Harvard University. But we've just obtained a letter from the Harvard president that explains what is at stake here. And Alan Garber, the president, writes this. He said these actions have stark real-life consequences for patients, students, faculty, staff, researchers, and the standing of American higher education in the world. He goes on to say the consequences of the government's overreach will be severe and long-lasting. So, Jake, what's at issue here is the proposed freezing of funds of some $2.2 billion, and then a new potential round of funds being frozen of $1 billion. Now, these are a variety of programs, but a lot of them are medical programs. A lot of them are research programs. So this is one thing that Harvard is really standing up in a way that many other universities have not, trying to take this fight directly to the administration. Of course, we should point out one of the reasons Harvard is able to do this is because they do have the largest endowment of any college. And so far, the White House has not responded to this lawsuit yet.
Okay, so this just happened. Harvard University is suing the Trump administration. Yeah, that's not a headline you see every day. And why? Because Trump's team decided to freeze $2 billion in federal funding over claims that Harvard isn't doing enough to fight anti-Semitism. The lawsuit says the administration is overstepping, trying to tell Harvard how to run its campus, how to hire, what to say. This isn't policy. I don't always agree with everything elite universities do. But this is terrifying. We have a government threatening to defund schools if they don't fall in line with their ideology. That's not democracy. That's authoritarianism with a red hat. And the scariest part? Harvard's not alone. Columbia, Johns Hopkins, Penn, all under pressure. Some schools are even cutting DEI offices just to keep their funding. Imagine that, rolling back equity efforts to satisfy political demands. What do you think? Is this a legit move to fight hate, or just another Trump stunt to punish schools that don't worship at the altar of MAGA? Let's talk about it. Thanks for watching Liberal Breakdown. I'll keep calling out this nonsense, and I know you will too. See you at the next one.